the quiet ache of summer. The rhythmic creak of the porch swing was the only sound breaking the twilight hush, a familiar lullaby Leo had come to associate with summer evenings. He watched the fireflies dance in the tall grass at the edge of his yard, their sporadic glows like tiny, fleeting hopes. Each blink of light was a silent question, a brief illumination of the dark. It was a peaceful scene, one he'd observed countless times since he was a boy. Yet tonight, it felt different. A quiet ache settled deep in his chest, a yearning for something just out of reach, something the fireflies seemed to hint at and then vanish before he could grasp it. The small town had always been a sanctuary, a place where time moved at its own gentle pace. Here, life was a series of predictable comforts, the scent of honeysuckle in July, the annual county fair, the easy nods exchanged with neighbors on Main Street. For Leo, it was a tapestry woven with threads of contentment. But lately, a few of those threads felt loose, threatening to unravel. He missed the unexpected, the thrill of discovery, the kind of vibrant connection that once pulsed through his days with an almost electric energy. His phone buzzed, rattling in the cup holder beside him. He didn't need to look to know it was Aunt Carol. Her calls were as regular as the sunset, a gentle check-in that always began with, "Just seeing if you're still breathing, dear." "Leo, honey, you there?" Her voice chirped, a little louder than necessary, as if she expected him to be halfway across town. "I'm here, Aunt Carol, on the porch, watching the show." "The fireflies? Oh, that's nice. You always did love those little things. Reminds me of when you and Connor used to try to catch them in jars. Used to drive your mother mad, bringing all those bugs inside." She chuckled, a warm, resonant sound. "Speaking of, you eat dinner? I made a casserole, enough to feed an army as usual. Can drop some off if you haven't." "I'm good. Thanks, Aunt Carol. Had a sandwich. You know my routine." He smiled, imagining her on the other end, probably knitting or tending to her prize-winning petunias. His routine. It was a well-worn path, comforting in its predictability, yet sometimes stifling. Wake up, coffee, work at the bookstore, dinner, porch swing, rinse, repeat. It was a good life, he reminded himself. A good, quiet life. "Well, just making sure. You've been a little quiet lately, even for you. Everything all right?" He hesitated. "Just fine, Aunt Carol. Just enjoying the summer nights." The truth was, he wasn't just fine. There was a hollow space that had been growing, a subtle emptiness that no amount of quiet contentment could fill. "All right, dear. Don't be a stranger. You know where I am." "I know. Good night, Aunt Carol." "Good night, sweetheart." He hung up, the silence returning heavier now. He shifted on the swing, the chains groaning softly. The fireflies continued their silent conversation, indifferent to his internal monologue. The living room light spilled out onto the porch, illuminating a dust motes dancing in the beam. He pushed himself off the swing and went inside, drawn by an invisible thread. His fingers traced the spine of a book on the shelf before landing on a small, tarnished silver frame. He picked it up. It was an old photograph, faded at the edges, capturing a moment frozen in time. Two boys, no older than 10, stood grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders. One was him, hair perpetually falling into his eyes, a gap-toothed grin wide on his face. The other was Connor. Even then, Connor had a certain intensity in his gaze, a spark that hinted at the restless spirit within. His smile was a little lopsided, a mischievous glint in his eyes. They were standing by the creek, mud splattered on their knees, a half-built fort visible in the background. Pure, unadulterated joy radiated from the image. Leo ran a thumb over Connor's face in the photo. He remembered that day vividly. The taste of wild strawberries, the thrill of discovering a new secret path, the easy camaraderie that needed no words. Their childhood had been a kaleidoscope of shared adventures, whispered secrets, and an unspoken understanding that had felt as solid as the earth beneath their feet. They had been inseparable, two halves of a whole, navigating the world together. Then came the college acceptances, the opportunities that pulled them in different directions. Connor, always the one seeking new horizons, had left for the city, chasing a future Leo couldn't quite envision for himself. Leo had stayed, rooted in the familiar comfort of a home, convinced he was doing what was right for him. And he had been, for a long time. He remembered the letters, then the infrequent calls, then the silence. The connection hadn't snapped, not entirely, but it had stretched thin, becoming more of a memory than a living thing. Now, Connor was back. He'd seen him around town, a fleeting glimpse at the grocery store, a car passing on the street. Each sighting sent a jolt through Leo, a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. He was different, of course. Older, the boyish mischief replaced by a quiet intensity, a guardedness that Leo hadn't expected. His eyes, though, still held that familiar spark, albeit a more subdued one. Leo set the photo back on the shelf, his fingers lingering on the cool metal. The ache intensified, a bittersweet pang of longing for a past that was gone, and a tentative hope for a future that was still unwritten. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap that years had created, but a subtle fear held him back. What if the Connor he remembered was just a ghost, an echo of a boy who no longer existed? What if the connection, once so vibrant, was now irrevocably broken? He walked back to the porch swing, the fireflies still winking their ephemeral lights. He knew he couldn't stay in this quiet ache forever. Summer was fleeting, and some things, once lost, were hard to find again. He just wasn't sure if he was ready to start looking. A dusty return. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of the old oak branch against the kitchen window pane usually brought a calming familiarity. Today, it was eclipsed by a new sound, one that rumbled into Leo's quiet afternoon like a distant storm. He looked up from the chipped mug cradled in his hands, brow furrowed. It wasn't the familiar purr of his father's sedan, nor the reedy whine of Mrs. Henderson's ancient hatchback. This was a deeper growl, a struggling engine announcing its weary arrival. A cloud of fine, ochre dust billowed up past the window as a beat-up pickup truck coughed its way into the gravel driveway. It was an antique, faded blue paint peeling in sun-baked flakes, its bed laden with a haphazard collection of canvas-wrapped bundles and a lanky dark wood chair. The engine shuddered, then died with a final, rattling sigh. Leo's heart gave a sudden, unfamiliar lurch. He knew that truck. Or rather, he knew the kind of person who drove such a relic. A figure unfolded himself from the driver's side, moving with a fluid grace that belied the vehicle's decrepitude. He stretched, a ripple of muscle beneath a worn denim shirt, then ran a hand through hair that had grown longer, darker, catching the late afternoon sun in threads of umber. As he turned, Leo felt the air snag in his lungs. It was Connor. The years had etched subtle changes onto his friend's face. The boyish roundness was gone, replaced by a sharper jawline and faint lines at the corners of eyes that seemed to hold more weight than Leo remembered. His shoulders were broader, his frame leaner, but the way he carried himself, that easy, almost languid posture, was unmistakably Connor. Yet, there was an unfamiliar stillness about him, a quiet intensity that had never been part of the boisterous boy Leo had chased through these very fields. Connor spotted him in the window, and a slow smile spread across his face, not quite reaching his eyes. It was a guarded smile, a flicker of warmth quickly banked. He raised a hand in a hesitant wave, a gesture that felt both intimate and distant. Leo pushed away from the counter, his mug forgotten. He walked to the back door, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and trepidation. The screen door creaked open, a familiar sound marking an unfamiliar moment. "Connor?" Leo's voice was a little rougher than he intended, a question wrapped in disbelief. Connor leaned against the truck's fender, sunlight glinting off the metal. "Hey, Leo?" His voice was deeper too, a low rumble that resonated in the afternoon air. It lacked the immediate spark, the quick wit Leo remembered, but it held a new kind of gravity. They stood for a moment, separated by the small expanse of the lawn. The silence stretched taut between them. The cicadas hummed their insistent chorus, and a breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak, a gentle counterpoint to the unspoken words. Then, Leo closed the distance. He reached out, not quite sure what to expect, and Connor met him halfway. Their embrace was awkward at first, a clumsy tangle of limbs and memories. But then, Connor's arms tightened around him, a brief, powerful squeeze that spoke volumes. Leo felt the solid warmth of him, the familiar scent of wood smoke, and something indefinably new, like distant cities and open roads. Pulling back, Leo studied him, a quiet curiosity blooming in his chest. "You're back." Connor nodded, his gaze sweeping over the familiar house, the overgrown garden, the swing set that still stood sentinel by the old apple tree. For a bit. Needed a change of scenery. He offered another small smile, a shadow of the old Connor flickering through. "A bit?" Leo echoed, a faint disappointment pricking him. He had hoped for more permanence, for a true return. "You just rolled in, no warning, no call." Connor shrugged, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "It was a last-minute decision. Figured you'd be around." His eyes, though, held a distant quality, as if he were looking through Leo, rather than at him. Leo felt a subtle shift in the air between them, an invisible wall that hadn't been there before. The Connor he knew was a whirlwind of energy, a cascade of words and laughter. This Connor was quieter, his movements more deliberate, his expressions carefully modulated. The intensity was there, yes, but it was channeled inward, creating a reservoir of unspoken thoughts. "Well, come on in," Leo said, gesturing towards the house. "You look like you've been living in that truck." Connor chuckled, a soft, low sound that barely disturbed the afternoon stillness. "Something like that." He followed Leo towards the house, his boots crunching on the gravel. As he passed the swing set, his gaze lingered for a moment, a faint, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. A shared memory, perhaps, a whisper of their childhood selves. Inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books filled the air, a stark contrast to the dust and gasoline that clung to Connor. Leo watched him, a quiet ache settling in his chest. So much had changed, not just in the years they'd been apart, but in Connor himself. The boy who had left was a vibrant, impulsive creature. The man who had returned was a landscape of quiet shadows and unspoken stories, and Leo found himself yearning to unravel every single one. He wanted to know what had carved these new lines into his friend's face, what had dimmed the light in his eyes, and whether the old Connor, the one he missed so fiercely, was still somewhere beneath the surface. "So," Leo began, breaking the comfortable yet slightly unnerving silence as they stood in the living room. "What brings you back to this sleepy little town?" He kept his tone light, but his gaze was fixed on Connor, searching for answers in the guarded planes of his face. Connor ran a hand along the spine of a book on the shelf, his fingers tracing the worn leather. Just needed to breathe, I guess. His voice was low, almost a murmur. The city, it got to be a bit much. He didn't elaborate, and Leo sensed a door closing, a topic he wasn't yet ready to discuss. The afternoon sun, now lower in the sky, cast long shadows across the room, deepening the quiet intensity in Connor's eyes. He looked around the familiar space, his gaze lingering on the faded photographs on the mantelpiece. A younger Leo and Connor grinning toothily, arms slung around each other, blissfully unaware of the years that lay ahead. A pang of nostalgia, sharp and sweet, shot through Leo. This was a new beginning, yes, but it was also an echo of a past that now felt impossibly far away. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this return was more than just a passing visit. It was a turning point, a ripple in the quiet pond of his life. And he also knew, with a different kind of certainty, that the questions swirling around Connor were only just beginning to surface. Echoes in the treehouse. The path to the old treehouse was a ribbon of memory, winding through the familiar woods behind Leo's childhood home. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor, just as it always had. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, filled Leo's lungs with a bittersweet ache. He led the way, his steps quick and eager, a stark contrast to Connor's measured pace behind him. Connor, still wearing the dust of the road, moved with a quiet intensity, his gaze sweeping the trees as if searching for something lost, or perhaps something he hoped to avoid. Leo reached the gnarled oak first, its ancient branches spreading like welcoming arms. The rope ladder, miraculously still intact, dangled invitingly. "Remember this?" Leo's voice was a little breathless with excitement, a youthful tremor he hadn't expected. He reached out, his fingers tracing the rough bark. "We practically lived up here." Connor nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He didn't smile. He simply watched Leo, his expression a careful mask. Leo scaled the ladder with a practiced ease, pulling himself onto the sturdy wooden platform. The small, weather-beaten structure, built by their fathers on a long-forgotten summer, creaked a familiar welcome. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, filtering through the gaps in the planks. The remnants of their childhood, a faded comic book, a petrified bird's nest, a carved initial, were still there, enshrined by time. Connor followed, his movements fluid and economical, climbing with an almost predatory grace that Leo had never seen in him before. Once inside, the treehouse felt smaller, more intimate than Leo remembered. The air grew heavy with unspoken history. "Remember the time you convinced me that the squirrel living in that knot was a miniature dragon?" Leo laughed, gesturing towards a knothole in the wall. "I spent an entire afternoon trying to feed it acorns, hoping it would breathe fire." A faint smile touched Connor's lips, a fleeting shadow. "You were always more imaginative," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He ran a hand along a splintered beam, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "I just went along for the ride." "And what a ride it was," Leo said, settling onto a worn crate that had once served as their treasure chest. He looked at Connor, really looked at him, trying to bridge the chasm of years and experiences that lay between them. "We planned our escape from the evil empire from right here. Remember our secret code names?" Connor's eyes, a darker, more weary shade of blue than Leo recalled, met his. "You were Shadowhawk," he said, a ghost of a chuckle escaping him. And I was stone wall, because I never gave anything away. You certainly lived up to that, didn't you? Leo's tone was light, but there was an undercurrent of genuine curiosity. So, Stonewall, what adventures have you been on? What kind of walls have you been building out there? The faint smile vanished. Connor turned away, his gaze fixed on the distant canopy. Just living. His voice was flat, devoid of the earlier warmth. Living where? Doing what? Leo pressed, a knot tightening in his stomach. The easy camaraderie of their past felt miles away. You just vanished. No letters, no calls. We all worried, you know. Connor finally looked back at him, his expression unreadable. There wasn't much to tell, he said, a new hardness in his voice. Just moving from one place to another, trying to find my feet. For 10 years? Leo's voice rose slightly. That's a long time to be finding your feet, Connor. You're different. You're quieter. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the rustle of leaves outside. Connor's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth river stone, turning it over and over in his fingers. Things happen, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Things change you. Leo felt a pang of frustration, mixed with a deeper current of concern. He wanted to reach out, to demand answers, but something in Connor's withdrawn posture held him back. There was a wall around him, just as impenetrable as his childhood nickname suggested. Yet, despite the distance Connor tried to maintain, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the hardened exterior, a turbulent current churned. He sensed an unspoken plea, a desperate loneliness that mirrored his own. I missed you, you know, Leo said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. He watched as Connor's hand, still clutching the stone, stilled. The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of longing and regret. Connor finally met Leo's gaze, and for the first time since his return, the mask slipped. His eyes, dark and troubled, held an intensity that stole Leo's breath. A raw, unvarnished emotion flared there, a hunger that sent a shiver down Leo's spine. He saw yearning, a profound weariness, and something else. Something startlingly familiar, yet utterly new. Connor took a step closer, the small space of the treehouse shrinking further. I missed you too, Leo, he rasped, his voice thick with a vulnerability that tore at Leo's heart. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing Leo's cheek, sending a jolt of electricity through him. More than you could ever imagine. His thumb traced the line of Leo's jaw, his gaze dropping to Leo's lips. I fell in love with you, Leo. Flicker of the past. The scent of roasted chicken and garlic potatoes wafted from the kitchen, a comforting anchor in the swirling uncertainty of Leo's thoughts. Aunt Carol, her brow furrowed with gentle concern, had insisted on a proper meal. You've been far too quiet, Leo, she'd said earlier, her hand resting warmly on his arm. And Connor, dear, you look like you could use a good home-cooked meal. Now, seated at the familiar oak table, the clinking of cutlery felt unnervingly loud. Connor sat opposite him, his posture rigid, eyes frequently drifting to the window as if searching for something beyond the pain. Leo tried to bridge the chasm of 10 years with conversation, but each attempt felt like tossing a pebble into a bottomless well. So, where exactly did you go after you left? Leo began, trying to sound casual as he speared a potato. Connor's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He chewed slowly, deliberately. North, he finally said, the single word clipped and devoid of inflection. Leo waited, hoping for more, but silence stretched, thick and unyielding. North is a big place, he prompted gently. It is, Connor agreed, taking another bite. A frustrated sigh threatened to escape Leo's lips. He tried a different tack. Did you work? Find a trade? Connor's gaze finally met his, a brief, intense flash of something Leo couldn't quite decipher. I learned a lot, he responded, his voice low, almost a murmur. Things you wouldn't understand. The air grew heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of years and untold experiences that had clearly shaped the man across from him into someone almost unrecognizable. Aunt Carol, sensing the delicate tension, cleared her throat. More gravy, dear? She offered Connor, who politely declined. After the meal, Aunt Carol retreated to the living room, leaving the two of them to the quiet echo of the kitchen. Leo, desperate for a connection, remembered the old photo albums. Come on, he said, pushing back his chair. There's something I want to show you. He led Connor to the small den, its shelves overflowing with books and trinkets. From a dusty lower shelf, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound album, its cover faded with time. He settled onto the worn armchair, patting the space beside him. Connor hesitated for a moment before taking the seat, his shoulder brushing Leo's. The proximity, after the emotional intensity in the treehouse, sent a ripple through Leo. Flipping through pages filled with blurry birthday parties and awkward holiday photos, Leo felt a pang of nostalgia. There they were, younger versions of themselves, captured in amber moments. He paused on a page near the middle, pointing. Look at this one, Leo chuckled, tracing a finger over the image. It showed them maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing precariously on a rickety wooden fence. Leo was making a ridiculous cross-eyed face, his hair a wild tangle. Connor beside him had his arm awkwardly around Leo's shoulders, a wide, gap-toothed grin splitting his face, his usually neat hair slightly askew. He looked utterly carefree, a stark contrast to the guarded man beside Leo now. A soft huff of air escaped Connor's lips, a sound so unfamiliar it took Leo a moment to register it. Then, a slow, genuine smile began to form, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It wasn't the tight, polite smile he'd offered Aunt Carol, nor the grim set of his jaw. This was the smile Leo remembered, a flash of pure, unadulterated joy that briefly melted away the years and the hardship. He looked at the photo, then at Connor, seeing that flicker of the past reflected in his eyes. You always did make the strangest faces, Connor murmured, his voice softer than it had been all evening, a hint of his old mischievous tone woven into the words. He leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the photograph, and for a precious moment, the impenetrable wall around him seemed to crumble. And you always tried to look so serious, even when you were laughing, Leo countered, a warmth spreading through his chest, a hope igniting that maybe, just maybe, the boy he knew was still buried somewhere within this formidable man. Their eyes met over the photo, and the laughter faded, replaced by a lingering intensity. Connor's smile softened further, a vulnerability Leo hadn't seen since the treehouse confession. The silence that followed wasn't strained, but held a new kind of unspoken understanding, a delicate thread stretching between them. The weight of his confession still hung in the air, a silent hum of what had been revealed and what still lay beneath the surface. Leo suddenly felt a blush creeping up his neck, aware of the gentle pressure of Connor's arm against his, the warmth radiating between them in the quiet room. The memory of Connor's earlier words, "I never stopped loving you," echoed in his mind, making his heart race a little faster, and the small shared moment over a childhood photo suddenly felt profoundly significant. Connor cleared his throat, the sound a soft disruption, and pulled back slightly, the flicker of the past receding behind the familiar veil of his reserve. The air chilled infinitesimally. He closed the photo album gently, placing it back on Leo's lap. "It was good to see them," he said, his voice returning to its quieter, more composed tone. But there was a lingering softness around the edges that hadn't been there before. Leo's gaze remained on Connor, trying to hold on to the fleeting glimpse of the boy he loved. He wanted to push, to ask more about where he'd gone, what he'd seen, what had hardened him. But the moment had passed, the window briefly open, now gently shut. He knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and frustrated him, that he would have to wait. But he also knew, with a fresh surge of hope, that the old Connor was still there, somewhere beneath the surface, waiting to be found again. Silent waters, intense gaze. The damp earth and verdant foliage, a familiar perfume, filled Leo's lungs as they followed the meandering path to Willow Creek. The air, crisp with the morning's lingering chill, hinted at a day of gentle warmth. Connor strode a few paces ahead, shoulders slightly hunched, a weighty tackle box gripped in one hand. Leo carried the cooler, its soft clinking of ice against cans a rhythmic counterpoint to their steps. It felt normal, a sensation that both soothed and stirred him. They settled on a broad, flat rock where the creek bent, a cherished spot from their boyhood. The water, clear and shallow here, whispered over smooth stones in a constant, hushed confession. With practiced ease, Connor assembled his rod, the rhythmic snick of the reel weaving a soundtrack to Leo's memories. Less concerned with the catch than the companionship, Leo baited his hook with a worm he'd unearthed from his compost bin that morning. A comfortable quiet descended, punctuated only by the soft plop of their lines hitting the water and the occasional trill of an unseen bird. It wasn't the strained quiet of a fraught dinner, but an easy stillness, deep and unhurried as the creek itself. Leo cast his line, watching the bobber drift idly on the surface, then stole a glance at Connor, who was absorbed in his own fishing, brows furrowed in concentration. The ascending sun caught the subtle gold threads in his dark hair. Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal son and his shadow. A gruff voice rumbled from behind them. Leo turned to see Old Man Hemlock, his weathered face perpetually creased, leaning against an ancient oak, a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. He ran the local bait shop, and in his mind, his domain extended the entire length of Willow Creek. "Morning, mister." "Hemlock," Leo offered with a small wave. The old man ambled closer, his gaze lingering on Connor. "Haven't seen you round these parts in, well, a dog's age, boy. Thought the creek had swallowed you whole." A flicker of something. Curiosity, perhaps, or a hint of unexpected tenderness, crossed the old man's eyes before his usual gruffness reasserted itself. "Still got that knack for finding the good spots, do you?" Connor simply nodded, a tight smile barely touching his lips. "Some things you don't forget." Old Man Hemlock grunted, seemingly satisfied. "Good to see you're still breathing at least. Creek needs good fishermen, keeps the balance." He cast one last scrutinizing look at Connor, then shifted his attention to Leo. "You look like you're trying to catch thoughts, not fish, son." Leo chuckled, a blush creeping up his neck. "Just enjoying the peace." "Peace is a rare commodity these days," Old Man Hemlock observed, his gaze drifting back to Connor, "especially when you've been away." He let the word linger, then gave a final nod. "Don't let the big one get away," he advised, before shuffling off into the trees, presumably to check his own traps further upstream. The brief exchange subtly shifted the atmosphere. Leo felt a renewed awareness of Connor's presence beside him, the silent weight of his past. He glanced over, and this time, Connor was looking directly at him. His gaze was intense, unwavering, a deep, fathomless pool that seemed to strip away Leo's composure. This was no casual glance, nor the nostalgic look from the previous night. It was different, charged with an unspoken depth that stole Leo's breath. A raw vulnerability shone in Connor's eyes, a yearning shadowed by a guarded intensity that made Leo's skin prickle. It was as if Connor sought to read the very contours of his soul, seeking answers, or perhaps posing an unasked or quested question. A sudden unfamiliar flutter stirred in Leo's chest, a warmth unrelated to the cool morning air or the placid creek. It spread through him, unexpected and potent. In that prolonged silent exchange, the years of separation seemed to dissolve, leaving only the undeniable current flowing between them. He felt a pull, a magnetic force hinting at a connection far deeper than he'd allowed himself to acknowledge. He held Connor's gaze, unable to look away, lost in a silent conversation that transcended words. The creek's murmur faded, the rustle of leaves unheard, only the potent silence remained, charged with the weight of unspoken feelings and the profound intensity of Connor's eyes. It was a gaze that promised revelations and demanded a response Leo wasn't sure he was ready to give. He wondered what Connor saw when he looked at him like that. And a shiver, both apprehension and anticipation, traced its way down his spine. The air thrummed with a new kind of tension, a quiet hum resonating deep within Leo's own evolving heart. He felt a profound shift, a quiet turning point on the banks of that familiar creek. Connor finally broke eye contact, turning his attention back to his fishing line with a soft sigh that seemed to carry the weight of everything unsaid. But the echo of that intense gaze lingered, a burning imprint on Leo's mind. Whispers of a troubled past. The sun, a molten disk melting into the horizon, stretched long dancing shadows across the water as they retrieved their lines. Hemlock's earlier visit had disrupted their easy camaraderie, leaving an unsettling current beneath the surface. Connor, usually so adept at presenting a calm exterior, now carried a profound quiet, a weighty stillness Leo couldn't quite decipher. "Rough out there?" Leo asked, the question serving more as a disruption to the silence than a genuine inquiry about the fishing. He glanced at Connor, whose gaze, typically sharp and perceptive, seemed miles away, fixed on a point beyond the visible horizon. Connor shrugged, a movement that appeared to cost him effort, as if burdened. It was an education. He paused, wearing a loose thread on his faded denim jacket. Things aren't always as straightforward as they appear from a distance, you know. Removed from this place. Leo nodded, sensing a chink in Connor's carefully constructed armor. "I can imagine." He waited, allowing the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore to fill the void. Connor finally met his eyes, a raw vulnerability flashing there before receding. Some lessons carve themselves deep. You discover what you're truly made of, and sometimes you don't like the reflection. His voice was hushed, almost a murmur, carried on the twilight breeze. "Or what sacrifices you have to make to endure." The words hung, pregnant with unspoken meaning. A cold knot tightened in Leo's stomach. He yearned to press, to demand explanations, to peel back the layers of Connor's guardedness. Yet he knew pushing would only make him withdraw further. He recalled the look in Connor's eyes after Hemlock's pronouncements, a stark vulnerability that had pierced him. He glimpsed it again now, fleeting, before Connor averted his gaze, jaw clenched. They gathered their gear in a strained silence, the earlier warmth of their shared activity replaced by a palpable tension. Back at the house, the familiar comfort of the porch swing offered a temporary reprieve. Crickets chirped their nightly symphony, and a sliver of moon began its slow climb, casting a pearlescent glow over the slumbering town. "It's late," Leo murmured, stifling a yawn, though sleep felt impossibly distant. He watched Connor, whose silhouette against the fading light seemed to ripple with an internal tempest. Connor didn't respond immediately, instead tracing the worn wood of the porch railing with a slow, deliberate finger. "Sometimes," he began, his voice barely a breath, "you find yourself in circumstances you never envisioned, places where you don't recognize your own reflection anymore." He exhaled, a ragged sound that snagged on Leo's heart. "And the hardest part isn't even surviving it, it's returning and attempting to mend yourself." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The door was ajar. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Connor, what happened? You can tell me. Whatever it is, you don't have to shoulder it alone." Connor turned, his eyes searching Leo's face in the deepening gloom. For a fleeting instant, Leo saw it all. The anguish, the contrition, the desperate yearning for absolution. He saw the confession forming on Connor's lips, a silent plea for understanding. He reached out, his hand hovering, wanting to offer comfort, to bridge the chasm that had widened between them over the years. Then, as swiftly as it had materialized, the vulnerability vanished. Connor's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening, retreating behind the familiar shield of stoicism. He pulled back, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that felt like a physical blow to Leo. "It's nothing," Connor said, his voice now flat, utterly devoid of emotion. He stood abruptly, the sudden movement jarring in the quiet night. "Just old shadows." He shoved his hands into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. "I'm tired. I think I'll head in." Leo watched him go, a wave of frustration washing over him, mingling with a profound concern. He'd been so close, incredibly close. The delicate connection they'd been rebuilding had almost fractured under the weight of Connor's unspoken past. He ran a hand through his hair. The image of Connor's tortured eyes burned into his mind. The whispers of a troubled history were growing louder, but the full narrative remained stubbornly out of reach. And Leo knew, with a chilling certainty, that until Connor was truly ready to speak, their reunion would remain incomplete, forever shadowed by the mysteries of a decade lost. The sudden chill, the gentle rhythm of their shared life began to falter. After Hemlock's departure, a heavy, disquieting hush descended upon Connor, a stark contrast to the comfortable quiet Leo had come to cherish. This new stillness felt like a void, siphoning the warmth from the space between them. Connor started concocting excuses to be elsewhere. "Traps need checking," he'd murmur, slipping out before dawn, often returning hours later with an empty basket. "Just a walk," he'd clip, eyes averted, vanishing into the dense woods behind the cabin, sometimes not reappearing until dusk. Leo watched, a knot tightening in his gut. He tried to bridge the widening gulf. Fishing, a shared comfort from their past, was met with a vague nod. Then a sudden urgent task, mending an already sharp axe, repairing a perfectly good screen. Meals were eaten in silence, Connor merely picking at his food before retreating to the small spare room, the door clicking shut with unnerving finality. The easy banter, the lingering touches, the silent understanding that had blossomed, all shriveled beneath Connor's inexplicable coolness. One evening, after Connor had curtly declined a movie night, Leo found him by the window, a silhouette against the inky blackness. Moonlight etched his profile, deepening the lines of his face with some unspoken sorrow. "Connor," Leo began, his voice soft, yet betraying a tremor of hurt he couldn't quite suppress. "What's happening?" Connor remained unmoving, shoulders hunched in a defensive posture Leo hadn't witnessed since those first days after his return. "Nothing," he mumbled, his voice flat. "Nothing." Leo took a step closer, the floorboards groaning. "You're avoiding me. You barely look at me. You used to—" He cut himself off, the memories of their rekindled intimacy stinging. "You're pushing me away." Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Leo felt frustration coil within him, a hot wave threatening to spill over. Patience, understanding. He'd offered both. Now, he simply felt abandoned. "Is it something I did?" Leo pressed, his voice rising slightly. "Did I say something wrong? Please just tell me. I can't keep guessing." Connor finally stirred, a slow, deliberate turn. His eyes, usually so vibrant, were clouded, distant. "It's not you, Leo." The words were devoid of inflection, a rote response. "Then what is it?" Leo insisted, stepping directly in front of him. His hand hovered, wanting to ground Connor with a touch, but recoiled at the last moment, sensing an unbreachable barrier. "You were different after Hemlock left. Something happened. You mentioned an education." "What did he tell you? What did he do?" Connor flinched at the name, a muscle jumping in his jaw. A flicker of something, fear, shame, crossed his face, instantly masked. He took a step back, widening the space between them. "It's not important," Connor said, his voice tightening. "Not important?" Leo's patience shattered. The hurt, the confusion, the lingering fear of losing Connor again, all surged to the surface. "You think this isn't important? You're fading right in front of me. I thought we were past this. I thought we were finally rebuilding." The last word was a whisper, a desperate plea. Connor's eyes narrowed, an unfamiliar coldness radiating from him. "Rebuilding what, Leo?" he snapped, his voice sharp as a shard of ice. "A fantasy? You don't understand. You can't understand." The unexpected venom in his words stunned Leo into silence. Connor, witnessing Leo's shocked expression, seemed to falter for an instant, his gaze darting away. But the hardened mask returned, firmer than before. "Just leave it, Leo," Connor said, his voice low, but edged with an unmistakable warning. "No," Leo countered, shaking his head, refusing to yield. "I won't leave it. Not again. You told me you love me, Connor. You can't just say something like that and then vanish." "What changed? What is so awful that you can't even look at me?" A raw, guttural sound escaped Connor's throat. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable anger that stemmed not from animosity towards Leo, but from a deep well of self-loathing within Connor himself. "You want to know what changed?" Connor practically snarled, his eyes blazing with a fierce, desperate light. "You really want to know?" Before Leo could respond, before he could brace himself for the truth Connor was about to unleash, Connor spun on his heel. He strode to the door, yanked it open with a violent shove that rattled the frame, and slammed it shut behind him, the deafening thud echoing through the suddenly silent cabin. Leo stood alone in the dim moonlight, the lingering scent of pine and rage in the air, his ears ringing, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was left with only the reverberation of the slam and the chilling emptiness of Connor's absence once more. A lingering loss. A suffocating quiet descended upon the cabin in the days that followed, a leaden blanket that muffled every sound. Connor remained, a physical presence, yet utterly remote. He drifted through the familiar rooms like a wraith, his eyes distant, his jaw a perpetual vice. Leo attempted to bridge the growing chasm with idle chatter, with offers of help around the property, but each overture was met with a curt nod or a mumbled syllable colder than outright refusal. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, burdened by the echoes of their last, explosive argument. Leo felt a profound emptiness, an ache that mirrored the void Connor had left a decade prior. This pain, however, was sharper, more immediate. The previous wound had been a slow burn, a gradual dimming. This was an abrupt extinguishment, the cruel snap of a connection just beginning to rekindle. Had he pressed too hard? Demanded too much? These questions spun in his mind, a relentless eddy of self-doubt. Aunt Carol, ever perceptive, sensed the shift. She cooked with renewed vigor, leaving plates of steaming food on the counter. Her soft murmurs about the weather or the garden, a gentle coaxing for conversation. One afternoon, discovering Leo staring out the window, his coffee long cold, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Everything all right, honey?" Leo managed a tight smile. "Just thinking. Connor's been a bit withdrawn, hasn't he?" He couldn't bring himself to articulate the fractured intimacy, the stinging rejection. Aunt Carol sighed, her gaze following Leo's to where Connor sat on the porch swing, lost in the woods. "He's always been private, even as a boy. But this feels different. Like he's shouldering the world." She squeezed Leo's shoulder. "He'll talk when he's ready. Don't you fret too much." Her words, intended as comfort, only amplified Leo's anxiety. What if ready never came? What if this was another ending? He felt like a child grasping at smoke, watching it dissolve just as his fingers brushed it. He began taking long walks, following the winding paths through the bordering woods. Each familiar bend, each moss-covered stone stirred a ghost of Connor. He remembered a particular clearing where they'd built elaborate forts, their whispered plans rustling in the leaves. He paused by the gnarled oak where Connor had carved their initials, the lines now faded but still discernible beneath the rough bark. A sudden, sharp pang of sadness pierced him. The thrill of those days, the easy laughter, the unspoken understanding that had bound them, all felt shattered now, replaced by an impenetrable wall. He found himself by the creek, the water gurgling over smooth stones, a sound that once soothed him. He recalled the day Connor taught him to skip stones, their shared triumph when one finally bounced 5 times across the surface. Now, the creek's murmur felt like a lament. He picked up a flat pebble, turning it in his palm. Feeling its coolness, he wound up, threw it, and watched it sink without a single skip. The bitterness settled in his gut. He had desperately wanted to believe the past could be reclaimed, that their connection was strong enough to withstand years of separation, of change. But Connor's silence, his chill, suggested otherwise. Perhaps he had rushed things, pushed too hard. He should have let Connor set the pace, navigate his return on his own terms. So eager, so hungry for what they'd lost, he hadn't considered that Connor might not share that same yearning. Or worse, that Connor's experiences had rendered him incapable of feeling it anymore. Returning to the cabin, the internal stillness was a tangible presence, a testament to their widening rift. Connor remained on the porch, a silent silhouette against the fading light. Leo averted his gaze, walking past him without a word. the silence between them thicker, heavier than ever before. He retreated to his room, the familiar space offering no solace. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, the image of Connor's angry face, his retreating back etched into his memory. He had lost him once. Now he feared he had lost him for good. The quiet hum of crickets outside his window usually brought a sense of peace, but tonight it only served to amplify the crushing emptiness of the cabin and of his heart. By the creek, unburdened, the scent of damp earth and pine needles was a familiar balm, a comfort Leo had sought since childhood. It was a smell that promised permanence, unlike the shifting ground beneath his feet with Connor. He followed the winding path, the familiar moss-covered stones slick under his worn sneakers, his heart thrumming with a nervous energy that was quickly becoming his default state. He wasn't sure why he was drawn to the creek today, only that a quiet desperation had propelled him from the house, away from Carol's well-meaning but ultimately ineffectual attempts at reassurance. Then he saw him. Connor sat hunched on a fallen log at the water's edge, a silhouette against the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. His shoulders were slumped, his head bowed, an image of utter defeat. The remote, unreadable mask he'd worn for days had slipped, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Leo's breath hitched. He felt a pang of something akin to recognition, a mirror of his own internal landscape. This wasn't the distant stranger he'd been grappling with. This was the boy he'd known, lost and hurting. Leo approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. The crunch of leaves under his feet seemed deafening in the sudden quiet. Connor didn't stir until Leo was a few feet away. Then he lifted his head, eyes red-rimmed and shadowed. The usual intense gaze was dulled, replaced by a hollow weariness that twisted something inside Leo. He stopped beside him, the silence stretching, thick and heavy with unspoken words. The creek gurgled softly, a lone, steady heartbeat in the stillness. Without a word, Leo eased himself down onto the log beside Connor, leaving a careful space between them. He didn't touch him, didn't speak. He simply sat, offering a silent presence, a steady anchor in the turbulent waters. The air vibrated with a tension that was both agonizing and strangely intimate. He could feel the tremor in Connor's frame, the restless energy humming beneath the surface of his stillness. Minutes bled into what felt like an eternity. Leo focused on the way the sunlight danced on the water, the lazy drift of leaves downstream. He waited. He'd learned over the years that some wounds needed to be acknowledged in silence before they could be spoken. And this wound, he suspected, ran deep. Finally, a ragged breath tore from Connor's chest, startling Leo. "I can't," Connor rasped, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. It was a confession, an admission of failure that vibrated with pain. Leo turned to him, his heart clenching. He saw the struggle in Connor's eyes, the way his jaw was clenched, the tremor in his hands. "I can't keep doing this," Connor continued, his voice cracking. He gestured vaguely, his hand sweeping through the air as if trying to grasp at something intangible. "This, whatever this is, us." He paused, searching for words, his gaze distant. "It's too much. Everything is too much." Leo remained silent, a lump forming in his throat. He wanted to reach out to reassure him, but he sensed that any interruption would shatter the fragile dam Connor was struggling to hold. "I'm messed up, Leo," Connor said, his voice raw, stripped bare of all pretense. "More than you know, more than I ever let on." He finally met Leo's gaze, and the vulnerability there was like a punch to the gut. "I came back, and I saw you. And it was like no time had passed. But everything has changed. I've changed." His eyes dropped to his hands, which were now clenching and unclenching on his knees. I don't know how to be this person anymore. The one who just felt things, who could trust, who could let someone in. His voice dropped to a near inaudible whisper. It's like there's a war going on inside me all the time. A part of me wants to just fall into it, fall into you, and another part is screaming to run, to push you away, because I know I'll just mess it up. I always do. Leo felt a fresh wave of grief, not for himself, but for Connor, for the decade of unspoken burdens, for the weight that had clearly been crushing him. I'm scared, Leo, Connor admitted, his voice barely audible, a new tremor running through it. I'm terrified of what I feel for you, of what it means, of what I'll do to it, to us. He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. I can't lose you again, and I know, logically, that if I let you in, truly let you in, I'll just find a way to break it, to break us, like everything else I touch. The raw honesty of his confession hung in the air, a devastating truth. Leo finally understood. It wasn't a lack of feeling that had driven Connor away. It was an overwhelming abundance of it, coupled with a deep-seated fear of vulnerability, of repeating past failures. He was afraid to love, afraid to trust, and most terrifying of all, afraid of himself. Leo reached out slowly, deliberately, and covered Connor's hand with his own. This time, Connor didn't flinch away. His skin was cold, but Leo's touch was warm, a silent promise. The words wouldn't come, not yet. But the touch, he hoped, spoke volumes. It said, I'm here, you're not alone, and I'm not leaving. The creek continued its gentle murmur, a quiet witness to the unburdening of a soul, a silent promise. The confession hung between them, a fragile, heavy thing, like a spider's silk, glinting with morning dew. Connor, still hunched, shoulders trembling, slowly lifted his head. His eyes, usually a fortress of guarded emotion, now swam with unshed tears, a shimmering landscape of inner turmoil. The anguish etched onto his face was a raw, exposed wound, a stark counterpoint to the careful defenses Leo had come to expect. This was a man utterly broken, yet undeniably authentic. Leo's breath snagged in his throat. He'd witnessed Connor's anger, his retreats, the indifferent mask he often wore. But never this. Never such transparent vulnerability, so completely stripped bare. The sight was both heartbreaking and strangely exhilarating, a direct line into the depths he'd always sensed beneath Connor's quiet exterior. A ragged, almost inaudible whisper escaped Connor's lips, so soft Leo nearly missed it over the creek's gentle murmur. Leo. His voice, thick and raspy, sounded as if the words were being torn from his very soul. He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on Leo's, a desperate plea for understanding, for anything. Leo, I think I've fallen in love with you. The world seemed to lurch. The chirping of unseen birds, the rustle of leaves, the distant drone of a highway car, all receded into a muted hum. Only Connor's voice, imbued with profound agony and tentative hope, resonated in Leo's ears. These words, long imagined, desperately yearned for, now spoken aloud, felt both utterly shocking and impossibly right. They were a key turning in a lock Leo hadn't even realized was there, opening a carefully sealed chamber within his own heart. Leo offered no words. He knew speech would only shatter the moment's delicate equilibrium, perhaps sent Connor retreating back into the shell he'd just begun to crack. Instead, he simply reached out. His hand, slow and deliberate, spanned the short distance between them. No hesitation, No falter. His fingers brushed Connor's, cool and trembling, then closed with a gentle, firm pressure around his hand. It was a silent gesture that spoke volumes. Acceptance, understanding, and a promise. A promise that Leo was present, unwavering, that he saw Connor, truly saw him, in all his fractured beauty and devastating fear. He squeezed Connor's hand, a soft reassurance. Connor flinched at the contact, a tremor running through him, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled around Leo's, clutching with a desperate intensity that belied his earlier reticence. The tears that had hovered finally broke free, tracing hot paths down his dirt-smudged cheeks. He made no sound, but the silent torrent was more eloquent than any sob. They sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, the only sound the soft rush of the creek over smooth stones. The air around them, once thick with unspoken tension, began to soften, to breathe. It wasn't an easy peace, not yet, but it was a beginning. A fragile, tentative start. Leo kept his gaze on the water, allowing Connor the space to simply feel, to simply be. He felt the rapid beat of Connor's pulse beneath his thumb, a frantic rhythm that slowly, gradually began to steady. The raw fear that had clouded Connor's face hadn't vanished entirely, but something else was starting to emerge. A faint glimmer of relief, perhaps even nascent hope. He thought of the years apart, the chasm that had widened between them, filled with unspoken questions and simmering regret. The guarded glances, the hesitant touches, the near misses. All of it had led to this moment, this quiet creek bank, this confession born of pain and love. It wasn't the romantic declaration he'd sometimes dreamed of, not bathed in moonlight or framed by roses. It was something far more profound, far more real, a confession forged in the crucible of Connor's deepest fears, offered with a vulnerability that tore at Leo's heart. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and rose, they remained still. The chill in the air deepened, but Leo felt a warmth radiating from their joined hands, a quieter understanding passing between them. This wasn't a resolution to all their problems, not a magical cure for Connor's past. It was a foundation, however precarious, on which they could finally begin to build. A silent promise, whispered not with words, but with touch, that Leo would be there, a steadfast anchor in Connor's storm-tossed world. The creek murmured on, an ancient witness to their new beginning, the dawning of a complicated, hopeful chapter